Never remember how to read this thing until.
Oh, you go down to this.
There we go. That's what I wanted to do. All right. Richard, I think you can probably get us started.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Under RSA 91A:2, Roman numeral 3, the chair is waiving the requirement of a quorum at the physical location of the meeting. Whereas in order to ensure an uninterrupted flow of federal transportation funding to the region for RPC, must act on Amendment 2 to the Transportation Improvement Program. Whereas the RPC chair has decided the immediate action is imperative and the physical presence of a quorum is not reasonably practical within the period of time requiring action due to the ongoing pandemic. Whereas the RPC will invoke emergency provision and waive requirement of a quorum at the physical location of the meeting. With that being said, we will start. The roll call, David,
Sure. Do you want me to just go?
if you don't mind. Start with
Sure.
the floor and then go to Zoom.
Okay. All right. So Jen Hale from Hampton. I guess I'll just read everybody off. Peter Coffin from Kingston. We have Tricia Cheever here as our RPC staff. Dave Sharples from Exeter. Scott Bogle, RPC staff. Dave Walker, RPC staff. Chris Cross from Newington, and Lucy St. John from NHDOT here in the room. And then on Zoom, Richard McDermott
Speaking.
from Hampton Falls. Danya Siegley from Rye. Tim White from New Hampshire PBS.
Good morning.
Eric Eby from Portsmouth.
Morning, everyone.
And Lee Line from the Federal Highway Administration.
Good morning.
Okay.
Okay, could I have a motion to pass the minutes for 1/27, January 27th?
So moved. This is Peter Coffin.
That was Peter.
Yes.
Do I have a second?
Second, this is Danya.
Second for Dinah. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Right, call that a roll call vote.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, and then
Now we move to the notes from 4/28/22 workshop discussing coast operations.
because we didn't have a quorum there, that's not technically a meeting, so those are just the notes from folks that we did have. So I don't know that we need to adopt those. I don't know, I'm not sure on the rules on that, but I assumed that because it wasn't actually a real meeting, we don't have to do anything with those, but I just put them in there for everybody's information. We can skip that,
Yeah.
unless people have questions or comments about those notes.
No, that was informational session.
Yeah.
I'm just going to move on to attachment 2.
Tip amendment 4.
Yep.
All right. I am going to attempt to start a PowerPoint. Let's see how that works. Problem is that eyesight has deteriorated to the point where things that are close I can't see, but things that are far away I can't see with the glasses. So struggle. It is. All right. Let's see. So I'm going to share screen. There we go. All right, can you folks on Zoom see the presentation?
You get the small and the large, David.
Oh, boy.
That might be better here.
There you go.
Here we go.
That's a good start.
That's.
Did you want to start with the overview, David?
Yeah, I'll start at the beginning. So, okay, so we're here this morning to talk about tip amendment 4. This is, yeah, tip amendment 4. I've sent you all this information, so, as everybody knows, we have the transportation planning process here in New Hampshire. We have 3 documents that we deal with. Long-range plan, which is sort of the big picture, long-term projects. State tenure plan, which sort of sets up the queue out 10 years for projects. And then the transportation improvement program, which is our short-range planning document. Basically stuff that's sort of being implemented either currently or imminently. And our current tip runs from fiscal years 2021 to 2024. We occasionally need to make amendments to that. So there are 2 types of amendments. There's administrative adjustments, which I send emails to all of you about every month. Those are the small type changes to projects in terms of cost or funding source or timing, that kind of thing. Larger changes, we have to process a full amendment, which requires public comment period. It requires a public hearing, a little more effort on everybody's part. And these are generally the larger type of changes. So anyways, TAC committee reviews that, makes a recommendation to our policy committee for approval. So the current tip, again, we're in the 2021 to 2024 tip. This is a changing number all the time right now, but we're up to 17 projects. I think when I sent you the information the other day, we were at 16 projects, but we've added a new one. So 10 of those projects are regional projects, and 7 are based in statewide programs. So we began a public comment period a couple of days ago that will continue until the day before the commission meeting. So that will close on June 7th, commission meeting on June 8th, where there'll be a public hearing. And that'll begin at 6 o'clock for anybody who's interested. That's a little earlier than usual. We're trying to get that done ahead of, because June is our annual meeting, so we tend to not do a lot of business at that meeting. More of a sort of review of the year and looking forward to next year. So we're going to do the hearing early and hopefully be done that by 6:30 and get started with the rest. I've received 3 comments so far, 4 comments actually on the tip amendment so far, 3 of which are requesting to add projects. One is Exeter 40436, the other is Newington 42879, and Portsmouth 41752, and I'll talk about those a little bit as I get into this further. Net funding change in this tip amendment is just under $62 million in change. And overall net funding change for all the funding for these projects beyond the tip years is almost $113 million. A lot of that is new money coming into the statewide programs based on the new infrastructure law. So those are jumping up in their costs quite a bit. So there's going through the different changes that are happening. There's one project being removed from the tip, the Salem to Manchester 104-180X. This is the last sort of bit of the I-93 project, which means that project is actually done. It's actually leaving our tip for the first time in 20 years. So that's kind of a big shift. Kind of a banner day. We should have a party. We've got muffins. So that project is complete. So it's 159. That was a very small component. It was just covering the engineering piece. So that's all done. We're adding 5 projects too. We have a project on Route 33 in Greenland at the Winnicott River Bridge. They're doing an engineering study on that bridge to see what upgrades can be done to improve resiliency and dealing with the dam that's at that location as well. Portsmouth 43760, this is to add some sound walls along I-95 in Portsmouth. Those sound walls are predominantly, I believe they're on the southbound side by the Panaway Manor neighborhood, and also basically the whole stretch between the Spalding Turnpike and exit 7 on that southbound side will get us out as well. This is a project that is being broken out from the project on the bridge to use the breakdown lane as excess capacity during peak periods. So this is coming out of that project. And because they are switching from using turnpike dollars to federal dollars, it has to be added to the TEP. So that's why it's being added. Statewide, the mobile program, the municipal bridge rehab and replacement projects. This is a new program that's coming out of the infrastructure bill. So there's a pretty significant chunk of funding that's going to go towards addressing municipal bridge rehab. In addition to the MOBRR statewide program, which is municipal owned bridge rehab and reconstruction or something like that. So there's two programs out there for funding municipal bridge work. And then the last two projects, 43931 and 43932, are basically some additional data collection efforts that the state is doing. One is to construct some weigh in motion stations. I'm assuming those are going to be on the major facilities like I-95, I-93, 101, those kind of places. And then 43932 is to construct new permanent counting stations and upgrade some of the counting stations to be able to do not only volume but classification of vehicles as well. So we're able to tell percentage of trucks and that kind of thing. There's a number of projects receiving additional funding. First, and this is the Hampton Portsmouth 26485. This is East Coast Greenway project. And this is just adjusting the funding. I'll pull this down so everybody can see it. Adjusting the funding to be consistent with the current scope and revised estimate for the project. So the costs have gone up a bit on that. So it's adding 3.7 million there. Newfields New Market. This is a rehab of the bridge over on 108 on the Newfields New Market town line over the B&M Railroad there. So adding some right-of-way funding in there to address the current expected work on that project. Newton 41436. This is a bridge replacement on Pond Road, or Pond Street. I'm sorry, in Newton, and it's just adjusting the funding type. There's just a small shift in the funding there. It's an inflation adjustment.
Is that because it doesn't fall under those other bridge programs we were just talking about, its own project?
That's actually a state bridge.
Okay.
So yeah. So that's why, and a lot of
State
times,
versus municipal.
right, yeah, and a lot of times with state bridges, they may start off in like a pot of funding and then get pulled out when when it gets closer to construction. And Northampton 14979. This is a rehab of the I-95 exit 2 bridge. So that's just shifting the timeline on that project a little bit and adjusting the funding. Okay, there's 4 more projects here that are receiving some additional funding. These are the 4 statewide programs that are being adjusted. We have the statewide culvert replacement and rehabilitation and drainage repair program, and all these are basically being adjusted. These statewide programs contain multitudes of smaller projects within them. And as those projects costs change within them, they adjust the overall dollar value that's in the program to reflect that and to reflect the timing. And so that's basically what's happening here is there's 5 or 10 different projects within the CRD program that are changing, and it changes the overall cost of the program itself. So that's essentially what's happening for all 4 of these. Same thing with the municipal bridge rehab and the statewide transportation systems management and operations program, and the upgrades to the update to the state sign system or signing state system. So,
Children project.
so like I was saying, so these are considered parent projects, like because they're these programs, right? And within those programs are contained 5, 10, 20, 50 children projects, which are yeah, and basically under current rules, the the state is allowed to aggregate those smaller projects into a statewide program for sort of ease of management purpose. And that way we don't have to handle the individual changes to those as tip adjustments. We can handle the overall change to the program as a tip adjustment. So it's dealing with one project instead of 10 or 15 or that kind of thing. And those are fluctuating all the time. You see those a lot in the monthly adjustments where there's just these small changes. The municipally owned bridge project is probably also, that's seeing an influx of funding due to the new infrastructure law. So that's a large change. So another 50 million there, 26 million overall, 20 million overall for culvert replacement. So really starting to expand those programs and tackle some of those problems more holistically. Okay, so public comment. I've received 4 comments so far, 3 of which are to add new projects to this tip amendment. These have all been vetted through DOT, so they are sort of okay to be adding to this tip amendment. Because they appeared kind of late in the process, they get added through the public comment process. So we have Exeter 40436, which is widening the shoulders on Kingston Road, just on for a mile or so out on the edge of town here. And that's adding bike shoulders essentially. And so that's adding P and engineering to fiscal year 22 and adjusting the construction costs accordingly. So it's basically just shifting, adding a little bit more funding, just under $26,000 in funding. Newington 42879.
Just so you know, that includes the sidewalk as well.
Does it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The whole way.
Yeah. So sidewalk and bike shoulder.
And widening shoulder, bike
Bike
shoulder,
shoulder.
sidewalk.
So that extends the existing sidewalk and bike shoulder out
Correct.
another
From the
mile.
Little River.
Yep.
Out to.
Up to Brickyard.
Riverwoods, yeah.
Yeah. And out to Riverwoods. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
We went back to the voters, they added funding.
Excellent. All right. Well, that's good. Newington 42879. This is a Peace Development Authority project to construct a right turn lane on Arboretum Drive. And so basically what happened was they were intending to do that engineering internally. They decided that given the federal process, they needed to bring in people who were sort of experts in that. And so they needed to hire consultants. So the costs went up on that budget by $100,000. So that has been added in. Finally, Portsmouth 41752. This is a multi-use path on Owen Road between Route 1 and Harding Road, or just past Harding Road. So this cost is being adjusted to reflect the current estimate. And they also extended the project further than initially scoped. And the construction, the reason why the large change in the tip costs versus the overall cost change, the overall cost change of the project is going up by $180,000. But the increase in the tip is because they moved construction from fiscal year 25 and 26 into fiscal year 24. So that added that money into the tip that was really previously programmed after the tip. So the 4th comment I received was in support of the Portsmouth Southwall project, basically moving that up, doing that as fast as possible. So 2 other pieces that we need to address with any tip amendment is air quality conformity and fiscal constraint. Air quality conformity is really pretty much a non-issue at this point. We are in attainment now. We still have to make the statements, but we rely a lot on our previous analysis that we did in, I want to say 2013 or 2014. So we can continue to use that. So we have to say we're in conformity and we're staying in conformity with this. And then fiscal constraint, we are maintaining fiscal constraint according to the documentation provided by New Hampshire Department of Transportation. That means that we are not planning to spend more money than is available on projects during this time frame. We're still showing a pretty large balance of available funding in fiscal year 2021. But otherwise, DOT is pretty well programmed out the money. some of that funding balance is probably, it's probably occupied already. It's just the physical constraint documentation may not have caught up with it. I'm not sure. Because I can't imagine that there's $30 million
Money on the
from
table
fiscal year
here.
21 sitting on the table. And some of that is probably being addressed by this amendment and shifting of funds and that kind of thing. So any comments or questions on the tip? Tip amendment 4?
David?
Danya.
Yeah, on the previous slide, and this is just a reference question because I'm not aware of how the procedure would work, but as you may know, there is a proposed air cargo project at Pease. So the PDA is working through with the developers, who some of which have said it's not happening in the way it had been originally proposed, but then there's another developer coming in and saying that air cargo will happen. Going to air quality, how, and it's been stable, so I see that, but going forward, should this project occur, does that affect how you would assess air quality, which is anticipated to change given the increased freight cargo flights that are going to be coming through 24/7?
So, and maybe Tim can help me with this, because my memory of this is a little bit rusty probably. But my understanding is we only really, for these purposes, we only deal with surface transportation. So
Okay.
We don't deal with ports and we don't deal with airports on it. So while it certainly is, you know, there are certainly some emissions that would go with any sort of air cargo facility, I don't think we need to incorporate them into our analysis. Tim, is that your memory of how this works too?
Okay, good.
Yeah, that's my recollection, Dale, although I would be interested in getting my hands on some information about the project. If you could pass it along to me, I'd love to see it, so.
I mean, I think we wouldn't get involved
Sorry,
with.
Tim, are you referring to me? I'd be happy to do that.
I can get you Tim's email. Yep.
I mean, we wouldn't count the airplane emissions, but I would think that we would be looking at emissions from increased truck traffic.
Yes.
That's right.
For the
Yeah.
offloading and onloading.
That would probably, yeah, that would come into play, but it also depends on how that works, whether it's large trucks, small truck, is it, you know, like
Right, yeah.
Amazon style, you know, UPS style trucks, or is it large?
Well, If I could interject, excuse me, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but just to give you a little feedback on that. There is a list of end users that have been contemplated, and we are talking the likes of Amazon, FedEx, DHL. And so as a result, there is expectation that the truck traffic, the freight truck traffic will be extremely much higher than it's been. And so it's going to affect all of the surrounding on and off roads in and out of Pease. So happy to provide any information, Tim, if you'd like. I am part of a committee that is working to elevate the visibility of the concerns to the communities, to the Seacoast communities.
Super. Particularly of interest would be if there has been a traffic impact study for the proposed development completed.
No,
Okay.
not yet.
I mean,
One of the-
any types of information that you could provide, perhaps quantifying the amount of truck traffic that would be generated to and from the facility. I mean, you know, that would particularly be of interest. So.
Okay, happy to bring you up to speed on what we're doing. Thank you for the interest.
Can I jump in real quick on that? Just I missed some of your comments, Danya, but my understanding is that there hasn't been an application yet to the PDA, like a formal site plan or anything. And then the other issue, I think, Peter Britz, if you're in the room, I can't see you on the owl, but I don't think the question becomes is who has jurisdiction, right, over the development. If it's PDA, they're not necessarily bound to the same local land use regulations of Portsmouth. So I'm not sure. It's going to be one of those tricky situations as to how we can comment as the RPC on this or not.
Yes, so our understanding, working with 4 lawyers that are on our committee, it is viewed that it's the FAA that ultimately has must provide approval, and therefore, if it provides approval, it must launch an environmental, either impact statement or environmental assessment, which hasn't been done. I think the last one that was done was 2014. So so our view is the FAA ultimately decides, and any massive change to the structure at Pease would trigger their involvement. I'm sorry, and what was your other question, Lee?
No, it wasn't really a question. It was just sort of from a planning perspective.
Yes.
If this were Portsmouth, the Portsmouth Planning Board would have jurisdiction over the site plan and could issue or declare a development of regional impact or something like that. PDA isn't bound by the same rules. So I don't know when or if we as an RPC will have much opportunity in a formal process to talk about it. So that's all, just a comment for now, and we'll keep our eye on it as well for our communities.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. Any further questions on Amendment 4?
A motion if you're ready for
Go ahead.
Richard, are you ready for a motion?
Yes, can we move along to transportation project selection criteria?
No,
and
we need to.
Oh, you need a motion, my apologies, yes.
Yep. So we got a motion from Dave Sharples on tip amendment 4.
Yeah, I recommend that the MPO Transportation Advisory Committee endorse tip amendment number 4 and approval by the MPO policy.
And I'll second that, Peter.
Second from Peter.
Do a roll call, David.
Yeah, I'll do a roll call. So I'm going to bounce back and forth from Zoom to in person because that's how I wrote everybody down. Jen Hale.
Yes.
Yes. Richard McDermott.
Yes.
All right. Danya Seeley.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Danya. Lee is a non-voting member. Peter Coffin.
Yes.
All right. Dave Sharples.
Yes.
Lucy St. John. All right. Chris Cross.
I'm gonna abstain.
Oh, you're gonna abstain. All right. Chris,
Non-voting.
you're not a, I thought you were pointed to the TAC now. No, no.
Only to the RPC.
Okay, all right.
They're nominated, but not
Not
assigned
officially
to it
yet. All right,
formally, so I
all
don't
right.
cross
We'll
the
we'll let you
boundaries.
get away with that this time.
But it's in favor.
All right, all right. So let's see. Tim White.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Eric Eby.
Yes.
All right, I think that is everybody. So, all right, thank you. That one,
Is that everybody?
I believe that's everybody. Everybody who's a voting member anyhow.
All right. Transportation project selection criteria and weighting, attachment 3. David again.
Yes, we get me twice in a row here. All right, I'm going to do another PowerPoint, if you can imagine. Maybe. Okay. We're going back and forth. See if we can have the same sort of problems that we had last time. All right, can you see the full presentation or are you seeing the?
No, the big screen.
Excellent, okay. So I wanted to go through the, let's move this out of the way a little bit. The project solicitation and prioritization process one more time with everybody. And really today I wanted to focus on a couple things, making sure that people understand what the project selection criteria are, or should start back up, sort of the process that we're going to use, what the project selection criteria are, and then have a discussion about how the TAC would like to go about setting the weights for those project selection criteria. And so that's really what this is all about. So the project selection process really, once we get the projects from the communities and the transportation agencies, we really do sort of this 4-step kind of process. We look at whether the project is feasible. Does it seem like it's a reasonable scope? Somebody isn't proposing to, put a tunnel under the Scottsbluff, to connect to Maine, that kind of thing, where it's just never going to happen, that kind of thing. The approach is reasonable, it's likely to be permittable, those kind of things we look at. And we look to make sure that projects have local support or regional support in that, the community is on board with the project, or and it conforms to sort of regulations and plans. That's a really light look at that kind of thing. We don't really dig in too deeply. And then we want to make sure that everybody, the people who are proposing the project have sort of given us as much information as available about the project. And then we also check for the 10-year plan purposes to make sure projects are eligible for federal funding. That's kind of an important one. And so basically, the rough way of thinking about eligibility for federal funding is if your project is on a state highway, it's probably eligible for federal funding. If it's not on a state highway, it's maybe eligible for federal funding if it's a safety project where it's eligible for the HSIP program, the Highway Safety Improvement Program. So there's been a fatality or serious injury on that segment. Or if you're proposing bike and pedestrian improvements that are maybe like through the Transportation Alternatives Program or the Safe Streets Program or one of those types of things. So, but generally think about any general highway project, it's got to almost be on a state highway in order to be eligible for federal funding. So the 4th step is once we've sort of narrowed things down a little bit and kind of weeded out some of the projects that we have in our long range plan, because we have right now somewhere around 130 or 140 projects listed. We weed out those that aren't quite ready to move forward for the 10-year plan or aren't eligible for federal funding. And then we apply the project selection criteria to try to winnow those down further. And we've talked about that a few times recently about exactly what we do. So one of the things that we do to try to bring multiple different project types to the forefront as opportunities to get funded via the 10-year plan is we break the projects down by scale into local, regional, and interregional scale projects. We'll talk about each of those a little bit. So on local scale projects, the focus there is on projects that are sort of contained within a community, and it's more improving safety or access within on Main Street or that kind of thing. And these are generally smaller projects. They tend to be more bike and pedestrian projects, although they don't necessarily have to be. So for instance, some of the 2 projects I've listed here, one is the Exeter Kingston Road shoulder project. It's focused on improving bike access within the community and pedestrian access within the community. And the Main Street traffic calming and safety improvements in Plastow, which are focused on slowing traffic down on Main Street, improving bike and pedestrian facilities on that road as well. So those are the kinds of things that get brought to the forefront kind of in this pool. Compare that to regional projects, which if you think about regional projects, those are sort of more the connections between communities. They tend to be more state highway oriented projects, although they don't have to be. They still can be bike and pedestrian projects, as evidenced by the East Coast Greenway, which is kind of one of the example projects here, because that's finding connections between communities. So we have some other projects that are improving sort of those regional routes and sort of more heavily traveled routes as well. So these can focus on, not just bike pedestrian as well, but technically regional transit would fit under this as well. Although the 10-year plan makes, the 10-year plan process makes funding transit via that 10-year plan process is very challenging. So we don't often get a lot. But we're looking at improving mobility between communities, improving access between communities, that kind of thing, safety and that. So the interregional scale projects, these tend to be the projects that are on the larger, more heavily traveled facilities, things like I-95 and 993 and 101, Route 1, Route 125. So the major regional routes that connect our region to other parts of the state and other states as well. So, and those are often focused on safety or mobility, improving travel times between locations, that kind of thing. So that's just sort of an overview of how we break the projects down. And then the project selection criteria for this round aren't changing really from last round. So we're talking about essentially the same criteria. And we're focused on, I did not realize I've done this. Yeah. So no new selection criteria. We're working with DOT to add some additional guidance, and that guidance though is mostly for RPCs though to use on how to implement this. We have had a lot of turnover in RPC staff in other parts of the state. And so we have a lot of new people who are trying to do this process for the first time. So we're trying to help them out by giving them some additional guidance. And let's see, so I pulled this slide from another one, and I must have done the fun animations. Oh yeah, it's just going to keep going through. So I need to double check my remember this for the policy committee. Although I don't know if we'll talk about this at the policy committee. So what I wanted to do was just kind of go through each of the 8 categories of project selection criteria and just make sure that everybody is sort of understanding what they are involving and what we look at when we're talking about these criteria. So the first one, and these are all just listed in alphabetical order, economic development. And that's the degree to which project supports economic development needs and opportunities at the local and regional level, and the degree to which the project impacts the movement of goods to the region. So we look at 2 specific criteria within that right now. We're looking at the economic development, and how we look at that is, does it improve accessibility to a regional activity center, whether that's a tourism area, a job center, a housing center, that kind of thing. So we look at, does it improve accessibility to that? And accessibility in this case, we're talking about basically expanding how people can access places as opposed to mobility. Mobility is sort of the other term that it gets thrown around a lot. And mobility is really related to how fast you can get between places. So a lot of highway projects tend to be mobility related in that they decrease travel times, whereas bike pedestrian projects tend to be accessibility projects because they expand access to locations by people who don't have cars. So we're looking at access to regional activity centers. The other way we look at this is, does it address a freight bottleneck, or is it the other piece that would be, does it address a project that's called out specifically in the statewide freight plan? So that's how we look at that. And I've included in this, and it's being hidden by Richard right now, but up the corner, down this corner. So the relative importance of economic development, for each of these different project types, and I'm just trying to get a feel. I feel like when we score or when we set these criteria weights, we set them by the different project scales. So we set them by local, regional, interregional, and different criteria are more important at different scales. And I feel like for economic development, it's moderately important at the local scale. The focus is often more on accessibility versus economic development. At the regional scale, it's pretty important providing access to regional job centers and regional tourism centers, that kind of thing. And at the interregional scale, it's very important. Equity, environmental justice, and accessibility. So we focus, and this is basically looking at improving the transportation system for people who have been traditionally underserved. And so, I should say, particularly people who are traditionally underserved. So that's kind of the focus of this one. And so we're looking at 2 pieces of that. One, does the proposed improvement, make an improvement for areas where we might see lower income folks living as a group, or various minorities, that kind of thing, people who've been, again, traditionally underserved. The second piece of that we're looking at in this is removing barriers to access. And this is really more of a physical mobility piece, in that, is it improving the ability of people who are not able to get around easily to get around it? So maybe those types of things. So, and that's kind of the universal design piece, where you're making everything accessible. So again, in terms of relative importance, At the local level, that's pretty highly important, and it gets sort of less important at the larger scale projects. Again, this is all just sort of relative importance. It's not important, just relative. Mobility, again, this is the basically reducing travel times between places. And so we look at two pieces of this. We look at facility purpose, which is essentially the functional classification of the road. So is it classified as an arterial or as a highway? Higher functional classification gets more points, essentially. And the second piece is, does the improvement actually make an improvement in mobility? Does it decrease travel times? This tends to overlap quite a bit. There's another criterion category called network significance. There's a lot of overlap between these two. And then when we're talking about mobility, that almost always refers to improvements to motor vehicle travel. Rarely do you talk about bike and pedestrian projects in terms of mobility, because we're focused in this, at least in this country right now, we're focused on getting bike pedestrians access to places. Once we've got access to everywhere, we can focus on how we can increase the mobility too, so make them faster. Maybe electric bikes are mobility improvements for bikes. Basically. So at the, mobility is less of an issue at the local level. Again, a lot of the projects at the local level are focused on providing access or increasing safety. So you aren't necessarily wanting to increase speeds and travel times or decrease travel times. You're just trying to get that access going. Whereas at the highest level on these interregional roads, improving travel times on I-95 is something that is, basically reducing congestion on I-95 or places like that 101, try to improve travel times there. So that's pretty important focus for those types of projects. Natural hazard resiliency. This is looking at the exposure of particular locations in the region to natural hazards and the approach to mitigating that risk or those impacts. So looking again, two pieces of that, we look at, is the project in a location that's been identified as at risk to natural hazards? In this case, mostly, we're very aware of the places along the seacoast where the roadway system network is susceptible. Inland, we're a little less, we have a little less information on that, but we do have a lot of information on stream crossings, so we know where flooding has occurred in the past in some cases or can occur if we get enough rain. The other piece of it is looking at what is the project proposing to do? Is it actually proposing to do something that's going to either adapt that location or mitigate the problem at that location? So those are two pieces we look at. This is pretty high importance at the local and regional level, a little less so at the interregional level, simply because those roadways are a little bit more isolated from those impacts. Network significance, I mentioned this before, this overlaps a bit with the mobility category. This is the sort of the importance of the facility to the region and the state. So again, those higher functional class roadways are sort of more critical to the network. It's also roads that are sort of regionally important to providing access to places like Hampton Beach, for instance, sort of a major economic center, or the Peace Development Authority. May not be a high classification road, but it's important because it provides access to a major important sort of destination, that kind of thing. So we look at two things in there. We look at traffic volume, what's the actual volume on the road using recent counts as we have them. And then we look at, that facility importance piece is how critical is it to the region. And, again, a lot of overlap with mobility, and these two measures tend to overlap with themselves a little bit as well, in that the more important roads in a region tend to be the ones that have the most traffic on them. So, we're kind of measuring the same thing a little bit here, a couple ways. And again, sort of at the local level for projects, this is a fairly low importance, but it gets sort of more important as you get into talking about the regional and interregional projects. Safety. This is how does this project impact the safety of the transportation system? And we look at two pieces of that. We look at the crash history at the site. or adjacent to the site to see if there have been severe crashes there, so serious injury crashes or fatalities. And we look at what the proposed improvements are and how they'll impact the potential for future serious injuries and fatalities. This is a tough one for us in some ways, in that the state data set is, the location information is pretty poor beyond those fatality crashes and the serious injury crashes. So we have to rely a lot on information provided by communities with their projects. So using the local police departments to sort of mine that data a little bit and get sort of accurate information on the location of the crashes. Because the data set, the state data set, for instance, if the GPS wasn't used to locate the crash on site, it's often, they're often located in the GIS system onto the police department or the center of town, the physical center of town. So we get these groups of crashes occurring in places where if you look at the data, the details of the crash, it's not there, but location wise, it's showing up there in the GIS, and GIS is our best system for sort of investigating this. And so we needs to be some groundwork done to improve that location data, but it is getting better over time, but that's a whole different conversation. The other piece of this is challenging is estimating the benefits of a project. There's some guidance that we have from TRB, the Transportation Research Board, or maybe it's NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, I forget which. That gives us a little bit of guidance on that, but it's really a rough guess. And a lot of times it comes down to, if you're adding a bike shoulder, yes, that's going to improve safety for bicyclists and pedestrians, but if you're putting a traffic signal in, we can say, yeah, that tends to reduce certain types of crashes, tends to increase other types of crashes, but it's like, how do you, weighing those is always a little bit of a challenge. So this one is a little bit of a struggle for us. Safety, though, is always of sort of the utmost importance for us, and it tends to be the highest weighted criterion across the board.
Looks like you got a backwards, one of those slides you did backwards.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
it
yeah.
is. She said that.
Safety.
Yeah. Huh.
I know you will.
Wonder how I did that.
Well done.
Yeah.
You and
I surprise myself every day with my capabilities. Yeah. So, yeah.
How's the backside?
All right. Yeah, that's me. I scanned it backwards. I don't know. I hadn't even noticed that. Thanks for pointing that out. State of repair is another criteria that we look at, and this is the actual physical condition of the infrastructure. This is, in two ways. This is used. This is looked at bridges as well as like pavement condition, and so this is a little bit of a struggle to use as well to some degree, in that it's hard to think about doing improvement projects or ranking improvement projects based on the condition of the existing infrastructure. So just because pavement is poor in a location doesn't mean you should do an improvement project there, but it's something we look at a little bit. But we also look at the maintenance needs. Is a project addressing a site where there's been sort of ongoing maintenance requirements that maybe this alleviates to some degree, or if it's a bridge, if it's addressing a redless bridge, is clearly alleviating a maintenance concern. So we look at those to some degree. Again, at the local level, that's probably a little bit lower priority. It gets, as you get into the higher level facilities, it becomes more and more critical. Project support is the last of the criteria categories that we look at. And so we look at three things. We look at local support, regional support, and sort of statewide support to some degree. And what we looked at specifically last round was, what is the local priority? For a number of communities, we had multiple projects. And we've asked them to give us a relative priority for each of those projects in the past, and we continue to do that. So if it's a #1 project versus a #10 project for a community, we look at that kind of piece of it. We look at is the project supported in the long range plan? And if it's not, even if it's not listed explicitly in our long range plan, does our long range plan support projects of that type and with the goal that that project has? And then last round we looked at, is the need sort of a newly identified kind of priority? Is it something that's just come onto the radar but is clearly a high priority for a community or for the region? So we looked at those kind of pieces, and this gives us this local support or project support section gives us a little flexibility as to how we handle that a little bit. Dave, it sounded like you had maybe a question. No, okay. So those are the 8 categories. Maybe I'll just take a moment. Does anybody have any questions about the various categories and kind of how we consider them? If you're on Zoom, you might need to speak up because I can't necessarily see you. All right, hear nothing. I'm going to move on. So the criteria weighting process, those you may remember from those of you who've been around may remember this from previous iterations. There's kind of 2 pieces to this. We set the weights of the categories at each scale, right? So local, regional, interregional, we set those 8 categories and give them weights. And then we set within those categories, there's 1 or 2 or 3 sort of criteria that are actually how we apply that category. And we set the weights for those as well within the category, right? So there's sort of 2 pieces to this. So the total of all the categories have to add up to 100%. And the total for each of the criterion within a category have to add up to 100%. And so we do expect that there's some variation between the local, regional, and interregional, simply because different things are important at those different scales. We do round the numbers to whole percentages just for ease. I don't need to deal with calculating something at 14.37%. That's just extra effort. And there's no need at this level. And these percentages within each of the criterion, they stay the same across the scales. So, access to activity centers will always be, in this last round, it was 58%. So whether we were talking about at the local, regional, and interregional scale, it was 58% of the economic development score was access to activity centers. But at the local level, it was considered at 10% of the total score, whereas at the interregional level, it was up to 12% of the total score. And then the regional level in the middle, it was at 13%. So this was all just how things shook out last time. So looks like I just did this twice. Yeah. So, and this is just sort of illustrates what I just said a little bit, that, this is just using an example of the, I believe this is the local level, or maybe the regional level. So you take the two criteria or 3 criteria at the support level, and you add up the scores for those and weight them, and those become the total score for that category, which then goes into the total project score. So we have some options for how we do this at the TAC, and this is a TAC job that we've done in the last several rounds, where basically the TAC says this is how we're going to weight them, and usually get an okay from the commission. That's how we do it. So the last 2 rounds we've done this process where I set up a survey, an online survey, and it has really 2 sets of questions. The first set of questions are basically ranking each of the categories. It's just a straight 1 to 8 kind of ranking for each of the categories. And then within that, you basically did the same thing for the 2 criteria or 3 criteria within each category. So it's basically a series of ranked questions, and it's like 10 or 12, I think, total. So what this gives us is it gives us a relative rank of each person's relative rank of each of those categories. And it gives us that relative priority, and it gives us the relative priority for each criterion within each category. It doesn't give us a lot of detail about how much more of a priority something is than something else. And that's probably the drawback to this methodology. We can say that, yes, safety is more important than access, but how much more important? And so what I ended up doing is I take everybody's scores from that and I say, okay, 20 people evaluated and 20 people said, or 10 of those people said safety was the top priority. 5 people said accessibility was it, and 5 people said mobility. And so I just basically calculate a relative rank for everything, and it gives an average rank across the board. It's a fairly straightforward process. I'll go into more detail once we've decided on methodology. When we actually pull it off for next month, I'll give you the details on exactly how I calculate each criteria's weight. So that's one methodology we can use is this one, which is, again, this is what we've done the last 2 rounds. We also have the capability to do sort of a more detailed ranking. So there's a question we can ask on a slider bar, which gives you where you do a pairwise comparison between 2 things. And you say, which is more important in that, and the slider allows us to gauge that relative importance. So you can say that supporting economic development is much more important than ensuring access for all users in this case. That's here. So we get that more precise measurement of how much more important things are. This would require a lot of pairwise comparisons on your part because with 8 categories, that's 28 pairs that you have to compare to each other, because you have to compare each category to each other category. And then you multiply that by 3 for local, regional, and interregional, and you're up to like 84 or 85 pairwise comparisons, which is quite a bit of work. Not sure how much we gain from that, but we do gain that more specific sort of priority. So that's that.
Is there a way of doing it by sort of the result based? In other words, take that same chart and say, okay, safety, we want to assign a value instead of just saying it's most important, and then you take the number of people said that's the most important and add them up to give it a weight. You say, okay, that should have 60% or something like that. Wait, and then you rate all 8 categories.
Yep.
Locally, for example, by what you think the weight should be of that category.
Yep.
So you're listing, you could list them numerically, but I think giving a weight would add up, and then you add them up and take an average, and that's your end number.
Yeah, and that's essentially what I did last time. I think we did last time. So, and I'll get to that a little bit too. So, the other thing we could do with this is, with the slider bar piece, is to use that rather than on the categories, use it within the categories. So,
Right, you only have 2.
so you only have 2 things that you're comparing, except for under local, under the support category. So it would be, rather than 84 comparisons, it would be 8 or 10. So that's a much more reasonable number. It gives us a fine tune. If you look at the categories or the criteria weights from the last round within each category, it was almost everywhere was almost somewhere between 40 and 60% for each category. So it was, because it's only 2, everything was like 60-40 or 55-45, so it was, things were fairly close. But if you could do this relative priority, you might get a one weighting, that's 80-20 or something in there if people are very much interested in one piece versus another. So that's an option. It's I think a reasonable option. So the other way we could do this is we could just have each TAC member send me a simple spreadsheet that says, here's what I think the weighting should be for these categories. That has advantages as well, and that people can sort of, put in what they think it should be and how they feel about it. And then we just basically, I take all those percentages that people assign and average them out and see what we get. That the disadvantage of this is I don't have I can't do it in sort of any sort of strict format, because not everybody has Excel. Not everybody has, so I'd have to basically have everybody email me what they think. So it's, and it's, I don't have a form that I can build.
I was gonna ask that poll system.
Yeah, that I can't build. I mean, maybe I could, but I haven't, it takes some effort on my part to build something like that. So it's just, it has some, there'll be some transcription occurring, so there's some opportunity for error there. It's all. I think it's a perfectly valid way to do it. It's just a little bit different than what we've done in the past. So basically, my thought was to do sort of a combination of things, like I mentioned before, where we rank sort of the categories, the 8 categories, using the same system we used last round. So we use the slider bar within the categories to talk about the 2 or 3 criteria within each category. And that gives us a little bit of flexibility. And we basically use that as a starting point, so that I would basically put together this survey, release it very soon, so that in advance, everybody could do this in advance of the next TAC meeting in June. We'd come into the TAC meeting with a draft scoring criteria weights, and that would be the starting point for discussion. And if we said, no, we're weighting safety way too low, we could adjust things accordingly on the fly. And that's something that is perfectly within our rights to do. I think that's probably the best approach at this point. I'm looking for sort of basically some general feedback from TAC members and overall consensus if you think that's a way to do it, or if you think we should take one of the other approaches. I'm happy to do that as well. So I think that is all I have for this one. Yeah, so I'm going to stop my share so we can see the other folks. Does anybody have any comments or thoughts on the criteria or how the weighting process should happen? Yeah, I'm going to sleep.
Your recommendation of doing it, sort of a combined method where you're taking your counterparts and doing the slide, to me, that makes sense because you look at that larger separation between 48 and 52 or 47, because you'll see they're both important or they wouldn't be there for questions. It's just how do they, what's more important, I think. And that's less than 84.
Yes.
Because you do the other way for the ranking of the 80 criteria. My 2 cents, I think that's a good recommendation.
Okay.
I think I said this last year, but I defer to your recommendation. I mean, because I'm on the periphery.
Yep.
I mean, I look at it like, one question I would have is like, okay, you have 3, say you have 3 different approaches you could use, just, it seems infinite approaches you could use. But say just 3. And then you do one under one approach, you list 10 projects. And then you do the second approach. What does that list look like?
Yeah.
Does it look like the same? Is it 1 to 10? Is 2 and 3 switched? I mean, how different are these approaches? That's what I'm asking in my head.
That's a great question.
But I don't know. So I guess I'll defer to
I
staff on that as I did last year.
Because there are so many categories. Last 2 rounds we've had 8 categories. Previously we had 7. So we saw more separation in between categories in terms of their value, their weight, because we had more. But as you increase your number of categories, everything approaches the mean, sort of a standardized, right? Yeah. So we don't see a lot of separation. And ideally, I would love to see a lot more separation between these, but it's just not how it shakes out. But that's an opportunity for the TAC to discuss too. We can set the relative priorities. We can use the methodology we put up there the combined methodology at the TAC meeting. The TAC can say, we think, safety shouldn't be 15%. We think it should be 25%. And then we just, mush everything else down accordingly, to fit within that. But I think we have that flexibility. I think we need to take advantage of it and get the system that we want in place that works. And I think this gets us, basically what I'm trying to put out is how do we get started? And I just want to make sure that the TAC is involved in a way that isn't overwhelming, but also you're actually contributing. And that, because that's what I need is that contribution, but I don't want it to be like a chore or more of a chore, should I say. So
I found the last time we did this and the rankings of the projects that came out of it to be pretty good. I was pleased with the approach, so I'm
Okay.
good with the
Okay.
approach we use unless then someone has any desire to change.
Any other thoughts?
Going once, going twice. Moving right along here.
All right.
Mr. Bogle, Long Range Transportation Plan Survey.
Alrighty.
Yeah, you could just take this, I think. Great.
Pull attachment 4 up from the.
Close those two PowerPoints if you need to.
Okay. Close all the power.
Yeah.
All right. Actually, we need to share screen here for them to see this. All right, can everybody see attachment 4 up there now?
Yes, sir.
I will scroll right down to the survey. And hold on. For those in the room. Okay, so at our April meeting of the TAC, we brought a first cut of the survey for the long range transportation plan. Had a good discussion of that, got a lot of good feedback for ways we could improve that, both in the meeting, and a number of people submitted comments subsequent to the meeting. So in the meeting packet, attachment 4 includes an updated version of the survey, which has all of those edits thus far incorporated. And so we wanted to go back through the survey instrument, summarize the changes that we've made thus far, see if there are any further changes that TAC members would like to see, and then essentially get approval from the TAC to go ahead and field this. So once I go through the survey, we'll also talk a bit about our plan for disseminating this, get your feedback on that, and then talk briefly about our ideas for additional outreach. But in the version that went out and the version up here, this isn't set up in track changes, but all of the new areas are in blue. So let me just run through these. So on each of these, town, city, where you live, and question 2, if you work outside the house, in what town or city do you work? We had originally said that this would be a drop-down box, and at least I think what we may do for town, city, where essentially just have these be fill-ins, because we're going to have a fair number of people who work outside the region, and it's going to be hard to anticipate all the different places they may work outside the region. Question 3, this level of satisfaction with various aspects of the transportation system remains largely the same. We didn't get a lot of follow-up comments on that.
The only thing on that is the letters, and I'm assuming you'll correct that. It's not enough, but it goes AGF.
Oh, right.
Just
Okay,
so when you see that in the
Great.
future,
I think we had changed the order.
yeah, it's.
Pull that one.
There was a suggestion, that's right, to kind of group these by mode or by category. So we had changed the order. Good point. Question 4, we did change the phrasing of these such that they all read improving this or improving that. We had different verbs in there before, and I think Brad had suggested for consistency that we phrase them all in the same way. We had discussed at the last meeting what is now question 5. So question 4 here asks respondents to place all of these different types of transportation improvements in order of importance. We had originally put what's now question 5 here as an alternate version of this, with a question of whether folks think that policymakers should invest more money in each of these. But got feedback that this would actually be useful to see as a separate question. Question of, okay, if we're only looking at existing funding, what is most important, but also would respondents support investing more money in each of these. Question 6 here, the main change is there was a suggestion to split off train from general public transportation. And then there's a suggestion to add a follow-up question here about telework. We do have the question here about telework, but the thought was what people are doing now is still sort of an artifact of COVID, and asking people to talk about what they think they'll be doing in the coming years. Do they anticipate that they'll be able to continue telecommuting? Has their work situation changed to allow that in the longer term? No significant changes to question 8. Question 9 was originally phrased as how likely are you to purchase? I think we also added or lease an alternate fuel vehicle, and we had used phrasing from a question from a prior survey like a decade ago, and Tim made the point that in terms of flex fuel vehicles, those aren't so much personal vehicles, and probably more useful to focus this specifically on electric vehicles. And so instead of listing a variety of different types of alt fuel vehicles, we've now changed this to electric vehicles, and then put it in with timeframes. Are you likely to do this in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years? Based on one comment, we added an option for I already own an EV. And somebody else had commented, is there an option that I'm just never gonna do it? So instead of saying never, we said very unlikely, but something to allow someone to express if they really don't think they're going to do it. We reworded 10. I think the sense was that it was worded in such a way that it emphasized the negatives of electric vehicle ownership too much. And so have reworded this to, are there factors that are holding you back currently? And the one other option we added here is just available dealer inventory. Somebody made the point that it's difficult to get these now. They're hard to find. Question 11, we changed the description of the different types of settings. And this is the way they're described here is the way we had described them in a survey that we did for the long range plan in I think 2011. There was, I think earlier we had wording in the second box there, neighborhood close to a town center, and question came up, okay, how do we define close? And so it just says within walking distance, but essentially options actually live in the downtown. You live in a neighborhood close to downtown where you can walk to downtown, live in, say, a subdivision or a neighborhood that is well away from the town center or in just a rural location. One of the biggest changes is we added an interactive map where folks will have the opportunity to identify up to 5 areas of concern or project needs. that they see. So if somebody can highlight an area of particular congestion or an area that they see as particularly unsafe.
Are you asking for where to work and where you live? in
I
this
think
section?
since we debated what, so this is a function that we can do within public input. We debated whether since the where you live and where you work are options in the mapping, should we drop the first two questions where we ask people to say where they live, where they work? I think my feeling is that we should keep the first two questions because some people may not want to put a pin just where they are as opposed to what town they're in.
That's where I was going. with
Yeah.
this, just from sometimes you want your survey to not. On these maps, I could put it on my house. You
Yeah.
necessarily don't want having that information out there. I just don't think.
And
it's-
some people, because of that
Because
concern,
of
might
that, would
not do
think
it at
that this,
all.
yes.
And might not offset it, they just wouldn't do it. So interested to get your thoughts, whether we also include this here, sort of as a backup, if that's interesting, or we just drop it to simplify it and have people.
I'm looking at this, even if you expanded the towns that expanded it on paper, it's very difficult to write night, I don't know if you, where you work, if you want to.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're going to use any paper versions at all, this would be a very difficult thing, I think.
I think what we need to do for the paper version is just have fill-in lines. And that's what we did in 2011. We had a
Yeah.
similar question where write up to 5 locations and gave each person, for each of those, there was a line and people just wrote it.
And not a map.
Because we wouldn't, for a paper version, you're right.
Yeah, little symbols and stuff.
Yeah, we just wouldn't be able to get that to a scale, but for the
Right.
online version, and we do want to encourage as many people as possible to use the online version. They would be able to zoom right in. So yeah, I should have noted that for the paper version, I think it would just need to be a line to write it.
You just said this would just involve writing project needs.
Yeah.
And that doesn't. Yeah, I think that would be one case where you get a very different formatting on that.
Yeah. This question 13.
I'm just thinking on that map, would you want to give them the option of writing in for people who aren't good interactive with maps? Maybe give them the option of writing it in as well?
Sure, we can do that.
Yeah.
So we could just have the lines below and say alternately, if you'd prefer to not manipulate the map.
So for each question, we can allow sort of a open comment or not. So you could, for the map question, you could basically allow an open comment on the bottom and put it into the question, basically like, if you don't want to put them on the map, please list them in the open comment section below.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So for each of these questions, we can do that. You can leave an opportunity for somebody to write an open-ended comment if they have something that's sort of different from what you're offering.
Yes.
If people have privacy concerns, if you ask them to identify the nearest intersection that they would be comfortable identifying, that may serve your transportation needs. Say, I always drive in this direction, and here's the nearest intersection I'm comfortable identifying. Wouldn't identify your home, but it would give you the idea if somebody joins the route at this intersection. So you're not giving away where they live.
But I wonder, I guess the bigger question there is,
You want
do those three go together when they're reported? Because if it's just, I live here, you live here, I live here, I live here, and it doesn't go with their answer of transportation needed, then they're not linked. So the importance of where they live, most people are gonna have a concern by where they either live or where they're going to work. So I'm not gonna have a concern in Greenland.
Right.
Mine are gonna be between Hampton and Portsmouth. Or, yeah, I made that.
Right, right.
That type of thing. So is it important if they're not linked together, that person A, myself, lives here in Hampton and cares about Portsmouth because that's where I work?
Yeah, for the purposes of our analysis, does it matter to us if their concerns are on their commute route or somewhere else?
So that's what I was trying to
Yeah,
understand.
Comes down
So-
to what detail that you need out of the map.
Yeah,
So.
and I can't think that we would necessarily need that level of detail.
But basically, we know, like, we can track. Like, so somebody fills out this survey, we know exactly what they've answered for every question, and where they placed the pins. Geolocate where they were when they did the survey.
Yeah,
So
that's
we,
what a lot of people-
no, it's not really super accurate because it's based on IP address, which is assigned by your ISP, which sometimes, like, mine shows up in Manchester or Vermont even, so it's not, it's overall, big picture wise, it gives us a picture of who's responding and where they are when they're responding. But we don't use that very much. But what we do have is the ability to track, like, if somebody places a point on the map, we can track what they've answered to other questions too. So we can tie all the answers to an individual respondent, right? So
So it is data that could be used to answer other questions.
yes. Yeah,
So for example, 50 people in Portsmouth got together and say, hey, we want Portsmouth. That's like our project's on here. And it's
We would
because
be-
you had 50 residents
You could
all in the
see-
same neighborhood who.
And we can see, we had 50 respondents from Portsmouth, and we have 50 people say they wanted this project. Maybe there's some correlation there, I don't know, but that's the kind of thing we can do, and we can dig out of this. And the other thing is, I would say we probably want to separate maybe the where you live and where you work, either into a separate map or just keep it at the first two questions. But we can do, I believe, sort of set it so that it's like, tell us the area you live in on the map. And it basically takes those pins and it puts a big circle around them. So you're not saying here's my exact house, you're saying this is the area of Hampton everything, or that kind of thing. And so it's a little less, like pinpointing your exact location. It's more like you live in this area or you live in this area. And even if we get the town information from somebody, that's enough for what we need. It's just kind of a general feel for where people are from that are responding to this.
But you're already asking that. It's your first question.
Right, that's the very first question. And so it's a question of whether or not we needed this map at all. And
Why?
I don't think we do.
I don't either.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
but I'm just saying there are options for how we can implement it. I mean, we could, instead of doing the first question as write-in, you could do a map like this that just says, put a pin in the area where you live, put a pin in the area where you work, and it would give us that same information.
David, Danya's got a question.
Tanya,
Hi,
Yeah,
it's
Danya.
Scott. Hi, thank you. So I'm in the same kind of area that you all are discussing right now. I mean, my first question was, do you really need to know on the map where folks are, where they live, and where they work, since you're asking that question above? So my question really was, what are you trying to get? What data is really important for you to obtain from this map? And I personally would find very interesting to see where transportation improvement is needed and knowing where a person lives versus where they feel transportation improvement is needed. Is that an important consideration for you? Just a question. That was where I thought, do you really need? I think the map is great because I think people will think about where they've been and where they have encountered transportation challenges. But I didn't know whether it was redundant and if you really need it. And although I think David's trying to say that there is more information you want to get from this map that requires knowing where someone lives. And again, I'm not talking outside of the privacy issue, just the area where they live.
I think my inclination, based on the feedback is probably to drop the where you live, where you work pins here, since we'll have the towns from Q1 and Q2. And wholly aside from the privacy thing, I think it just takes more time for somebody to zoom in and find where to drop the pin than to write in their town up front. And there are elements of this survey that do get, we're asking them a good number of questions, and the more we can streamline it, probably the better. I'm not sure that having the location, say, within a quarter mile as opposed to at the town level gives us information that is really that useful in thinking about why they've answered the way they've answered for their 5 locations.
And still, it's a unique survey to each respondent, so that those data points from the first 2 questions can be used with the data from where they feel the transportation needs are.
Yeah.
Conversely, if I'm retired, so I'm not going to have a where you work pin.
Yeah.
But I know there's areas that I think need transportation issues, and they're obviously not on my way to work.
Yeah.
But I encounter frequently. So for me, it'd be most useful to have just, as Tanya says, the transportation improvement need locations identified, regardless of whether I'm commuting or not.
Right.
So I think that's the point that you're trying to get on question 12, whether it's going to be written or an interactive map.
Yeah.
And I really think, the KISS principle applies here. You got to keep it simple, or people will skip it.
Yeah.
So.
And on Q1, we did say, if you work outside of the house, where do you work? So to try to have the.
Right, sorry, that's,
noting
first
that
2
there are
questions.
people
That
that
was
either are retired or just work from home, so.
Yeah, and that's, but that's question 2. So those first 2 questions you already have.
Yeah.
And pin dropping is time consuming, and whole privacy issue and everything else. But with the pin dropping for where transportation improvement need is, you want that accurate intersection based, or stretch of road based, or whatever it is. It's and you said you have a label, so the pin has a label, you can write it in if it's not specific.
When
like
you drop
think-
the pin, I think
like
it then
coast-
brings up a dialog box where you can write in.
Right, so as long as you can do that easily, if they think, well, I need more bus transportation or more elder transport in my rural town,
Yeah.
they can say, well, it's, this whole area, but the concern is the transportation need is for more ride share or something.
Yeah, do you think that the way that's worded in 12, if the need isn't location specific, you can place the pin
anywhere, or simply type in the label box.
That-
Yeah, I would hope, without having it accessible online, you see how it works. I haven't seen this particular interface. What I'm thinking is for people who aren't as tech savvy to be able to know that that's going to pop up,
Yeah.
But
Okay, let them know
it could go-
when you
or you
place
could
the
just-
pin, a dialog box will open.
So I can see your verbiage.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's. The alternative is, if it's not location specific, write a comment underneath.
Okay,
Dave
there you go.
said,
Fair enough.
it's, instead of writing into a dialog box and trying to grab the pen and move it somewhere, you're worried that, well, they'll think that's the location, and how much room am I gonna have in the dialog box, and is it gonna be visible, like when you're doing comment sections, sometimes it'll just say, so-and-so's put a comment here, and you have to click on it to have that comment come up, it's not immediately visible. So I would say if a comment line below the thing would just be better bus transport or something that's non-location specific,
Yeah.
but as a transportation need.
Yeah.
So,
Okay,
and
So-
easy for techno folks.
once we get this up online, why don't we send it around to the TAC, just so everybody can do a run through?
Yeah, we can do that.
And I think that there's simple ways to just accommodate both and without complicating it. Because if you change, if the need isn't location specific, put in parentheses, such as an intersection or grid.
Yeah.
You can always place the pin anywhere, in parentheses, such as your community, your town, or area of concern, like.
Yeah.
Someone just writes senior transportation. I think that we sort of do want to correlate that to where.
Yeah.
Is it Hampton or is it Deering? You know, it's
Yep.
like, where is it statewide? So I don't think you just want random, I want senior transportation. That wasn't the purpose of this question. That
Okay.
was trying to get either infrastructure area, and I call infrastructure area, intersection, bridges, roadways, bike paths, you know, where is the area you want to see connected? But if you're gonna talk about senior transportation or we need more charging stations.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's very,
You want to know where that is. You just, and if someone just writes charging stations, it's not as helpful information as it would be charging stations inland. You know, the coast is full of them, we don't have them. I'm just trying to figure out what you're gonna use it for, but I think us trying it first when it's up might help.
my one concern with that is, and I agree, the more information you can get across, the better. But if you have a question that is a block paragraph long, it's the, wait, yeah, next, you know, that it's gonna take me longer to read this than I have time right now.
Okay.
We'll work on the language on that and streamline that a little bit.
Streamline a little bit, yeah.
And we can also, there's also helper text that can come up. So.
Yeah, those are great.
That we can put in, so that
As
it
they
pops up.
scroll over it.
Yeah, as they scroll over something, it'll pop up and say, hey, if you do this, it'll pop up put in a pin, it'll pop up a label for you to put text into, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's that we can make this. We've had pretty good success with
Good.
people interacting with this platform over the past, we've had it, 3 or 4 years now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we've had pretty good success with it. So I think we can make this work.
And has it been tried on different devices too, like a tablet, smartphone, laptop, computer? Sometimes it
Yeah.
behaves differently in different programs.
Yeah, it's been used pretty extensively. I think we've gotten, my memory is right, we've had somewhere on the order of 15,000 different people use this for various surveys that we've done. So, so it's been used on pretty much everything. And we can even set up kiosks. So typically if you are, you know, filling out the survey from your phone or your home computer or something, you're limited to how many times you can use it before it locks you out, because it's like somebody trying to game it, you know, where you have one person trying to enter it 5 times or 20 times to change the results. We don't see that a lot, but we can set up like an iPad or something at a meeting as a kiosk, and you can have people, you know, come up and fill it out. You know, let's say we talk about going to like farmers markets and chatting with people there, and you could have people fill it out at farmers market as a kiosk kind of thing. So, or you can set it up at a meeting or planning board meeting or something like that, where you might get some input. So we have a lot of options on how we can do this. And there's a data entry port so that it makes it relatively easy for if you get paper surveys. You can enter the data pretty quickly on that. You can actually even allow people like TAC members, like if you wanted to take it to your planning board meeting and you got 10 responses, we could give you access to enter that data, that kind of thing. So you know, there's a lot of flexibility and how we implement it, and the system is pretty robust at this point. So pretty confident that we can figure out a way that this is going to work for most everybody. And I haven't, you know, initially when we started using this, we would get a lot of concerns about people's ability to utilize it, but I think I haven't heard those so much in the last year or two. So I think people are a little more comfortable doing online surveys, and And the formatting is good enough on your phone. You can certainly do it on your phone, or you can do it on.
Question 12 here. This is one that we used in 2011, I think, asking people to identify how strongly they would support or oppose different revenue generation mechanisms, essentially making the point that in order to implement the various system improvements that we asked them to prioritize earlier in the survey, that it's going to take additional funding.
Get rid of it.
That's
my goal.
Yeah.
I thought it was completely over, it turned into something personal, and so you wanted me to get into budgets and politics.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
versus information gathering.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think that is anything. Yeah. We don't want to wait in those waters.
Yep. All right.
Personally.
It's interesting. It's interesting, but I don't know that we can do much with it because it's not a random sample survey, so we can't bring it to policymakers and say this percentage of your this percentage of your constituents feel this way. So at any rate, that said, I do think that a
That
question
was
about the local
interesting.
option fee is useful.
No, I do too. I just thought it didn't pass. I thought it went from 5 to 10.
It didn't. There have been several
Oh,
attempts to
okay.
increase it from 5 to 10. I think this year the bill was 5 to 15, and each year
Okay.
I want to say maybe 2 or 3 years ago, it passed both houses and then this.
Yeah. Oh, and then it never made it through. Okay.
Yeah.
I put this back out to my guys going, you know, my 7 years there, why I never heard of this. They're like, before your time, they keep saying no, and I have no clue why.
The old Seacoast MPO, I think, worked with Senator Clark and the delegation from here to get this passed, essentially as a means to allow municipalities to raise
Okay.
funds for transit, say, or other needs that couldn't be handled with gas tax or regular registration.
Yeah, Hampton doesn't have it. does it? Yeah, Exeter's been great for Exeter. We've had it for years, and it's been a.
Does it provide you a significant amount? Because I would have thought 5,000, $5 per vehicle, and if, you've got Kingston, only 6,000 residents, of which maybe 3,500 are drivers, you may have 7,000 at the most vehicles. Or I would go.
Less than $35,000. Not bad.
I sit there and go, transportation approved in my head, unless it's super defined in the RSA or bill.
Well,
They want a
Oh,
speed bump, there you go.
But
Take
over
care of
here,
that,
it's a
not my-
capital, right? It's
not
a
my budget.
capital reserve fund, we treat it,
Oh,
so it
CRF.
accumulates from year to year.
Okay.
Ours is accumulated, and then I needed like another $108,000 to match a pedestrian project, and boom, there's the funds that's available. So we didn't have to go back to the voters to get it. So I think if you just,
I think
you know,
any option is good. I'm wondering. Is that $5 is.
Exeter, for example, initially used it pretty much exclusively for senior transportation.
Yeah.
For its contributions to Task and Coast and Meals on Wheels and the senior taxi voucher program. Dover, I think, uses it, as Dave was describing, to develop a pool of funds to use as match on TAP grants and CMAQ grants.
Could you use it for a speed bump?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's where like little
Yeah,
things like that, we
yeah,
want one of
yeah.
those pedestrian floppy signs in the crosswalk.
Yeah.
They're like $400 and I don't put them in my budget. Oh,
Yeah.
we want 10 of them.
Yeah, I think it's good,
It's a
only
good thing.
because it's informational. As you said, we've never heard of this, and then maybe people will start asking the selectmen, why aren't we doing this?
When we asked this question together with the last question, in I think 2011, support for this was a lot higher than almost any of the other revenue mechanisms. I think because you don't have to do math to figure out, okay, if we raise the gas tax this much, how many miles do I drive? How much is this going to cost me? It's $5. I know it's being prioritized locally, not by the legislature or not in Concord or something. So, but anyway, moving on.
Okay.
There was a Q16 originally said lived in southeast New Hampshire. And somebody raised the question, okay, how are people defining Southeast New Hampshire? So we've just changed it to New Hampshire. We originally had separated racial from Hispanic ethnic identity because that's the way the census does it. But the point was made that, you know, since we're structuring this as a check all that apply, we can streamline a bit by condensing those into a single question.
Here,
Here,
I'm sorry, would you ask them 16, I don't live in New Hampshire? Because what if you get someone, you're going out for the survey, right? If someone works in Exeter and lives in Newburyport, do you want them to fill in the survey or?
Yeah. So.
And I just, you know, just to be complete.
You could say if you live in New Hampshire, how long have you lived here?
Just
you
something to
just
give an
say
option.
NA.
Or.
NA, yeah. Then they'll leave it blank.
On 18, suggestion to add municipal board or committee member as an option that we didn't have before. We had an option like this, but there was a suggestion to kind of clarify that. And then a suggestion to separate out if you're in the transportation industry versus a different business sector. On employment, there's a suggestion to add a disability category. We realigned these two in order to correspond to census income categories. And then there was a suggestion to add a where did you hear about this? And really, I think the benefit of this question for us is it will help us evaluate our public outreach efforts. And then the last addition was another open-ended question at the end, kind of broad, what changes in the overall transportation system would you like to see in the next 20 years? And then we have kind of a catch-all, any other comments?
God, if you could go back to that question on transportation system user, what was that? Yeah. What does that mean, transportation system user? I mean, anybody who leaves their house is using the transportation system, right? Just walk on the street, walk.
Yeah, the reason we have that is we asked a question like this before where we didn't have that, and we had a lot of people write in, I drive, or I just, you know.
Oh.
I don't fit any of these other categories, but I use the system. So it's sort of the gimme, everybody checks that.
So they can answer it, you know, so you have to have an answer for it.
We should also probably include in that like an RPC commissioner / TAC member, so that we could isolate out.
Okay.
Isn't that municipal board or committee?
I would.
You want the more specific people.
Yeah, I want to know what you guys are saying, yes.
Okay.
This is how we did the survey.
Yeah.
So I just think that TAC members and commission members are more informed as a whole than the general public about the transportation system and what all the various pieces are.
You do.
So it's sort of important to call that out a little bit.
You'll
just
be
to make sure.
eliminating any anonymity because you already asked us where we live.
Yep. Yeah.
So you're not going to get an answer to the income question, are you?
No, I
think it's,
Yeah.
This is X.
Yeah, I mean, that does, I mean, there are of course privacy issues with this data. We don't mess around with that stuff. We aggregate it and look at it. We rarely look at, the only things that we look at on an individual level, really the comments that people put into the, you know, that are extra to the questions or the specific answers. Those are the texts that we look at the individual stuff. Otherwise, it's pretty well aggregated into, we got 20 responses from Hampton, you know, we got 15 responses from Portsmouth, you know, and that kind of thing. So we don't, in fact, this may be the only time we've actually asked income.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, what do you, I mean, I can see ways to use it.
Scott, Danya's got a question, Scott. Danya's got a question. Go ahead, Danya.
Go quickly back to the question regarding racial or ethnic group, number 17. This is just a question about, do you need this information? Is that something that's required to be included in this survey?
We are encouraged to ask this question as part of our Title VI non-discrimination obligations for federal funding.
Okay.
Essentially, to be able to identify,
And would it be,
do we see different answers from folks of different racial and ethnic groups, or folks who are from minority groups as opposed to white population, and to be able to do an analysis of that.
Is that the same
Okay.
reason you do an income, to see what the lower income people respond, the higher income people say?
Yeah.
would it be? Sorry.
Go on.
Go ahead, Diane.
No, it's just I'm lagging. My internet is unstable. Maybe it's me that's unstable, but would it be possible to add prefer not to say? I think there is a certain
no, other.
sensitivity.
Gender, she was asking.
No,
Right.
Ethnic,
Not-
there is an
I'm sorry.
other, but it says say, please specify. So, yeah,
Yeah, you could-
Sure, we could add that. Yep.
I mean, just a suggestion. It's not that it's necessary, but I think sometimes there is certain sensitivity around having to be qualified as some ethnic group. And so just giving those folks the ability to just say, prefer not to say. So if you agree, that was.
Okay, we can add that.
Back to 18.
Yeah.
And I know if you were saying like the TAC or whatever, I think that if there was a category that said regional agency staff or something of that sort, because just to be honest, like when I answer the survey, I'm not answering it as TAC or anything. I'm not answering it as municipal staff, because that is who I am on this TAC committee.
Yeah.
You know, just like
That's
if you're GOT, you're here because you work for the state representing. So I say that.
Yeah, that makes sense too.
Is just instead of a specific group or committee member,
Yeah.
because you could go
I
everywhere.
guess yeah, that's true.
and talking about such a small group, you could ask members to just take the sample survey and, you know, if they don't want to answer certain questions, you know, about ethnic groups or income or whatever, but just to say what, you know, I, as a TAC member, feel about these things, and then you can take those and keep them separate from the general public ones and say, okay, well, you know, this is why he keeps harping on, you know, bike paths or whatever.
Yeah, and that's, yeah, I mean, we can do that. What I tend to do is after a test run, we can reset the survey, reset the views and the responses. And so if we want to do that, or if we want to use the TAC input that way, then I can't reset it, or I've got to copy off the data before I reset it, and that's fine. I mean, it's not critical that we identify folks as TAC, and I think you're right that you're responding to it not as a TAC member, but as a municipal board member or a municipal employee. So, you know, that makes sense. And, you know, whether or not you're more informed about it or not is probably not relevant to the overall results of the survey. You know what I mean? So I think we can, you know, if you do, I don't want to have folks fill it out twice if it's not super problematic. Like if there's minor tweaks that we need to do, maybe we won't reset it. But if there are like major changes that need to happen, we may reset it, because
I'd fill it out twice, because it's check all the apply.
I was just gonna say I could be a municipal staff, a transportation user, and a regional
TAC
regional
committee.
committee.
That's what it would be.
So I would
Yeah.
pick those
Yeah.
three, and that would get you.
No.
Get you what he
I'm
wants,
saying-
because you know who we are. That's
Like what we typically do when we run a survey is we run a test, right? Then I reset it
Oh, gotcha.
and clear all the responses. And so if you wanted to fill it out, if you wanted your answers in there, you'd have to fill it out again, which, you know, this is not a short survey, so we want to be conscious of that. But at the same time, if there are major problems when we put it up there, that, these particular questions are a struggle for people or something, then we might have to reset it. And I'm just letting you know, I guess, maybe that we'll try to be conscious about how we do that.
Yeah, I think we need to be clear if we're asking you just to test or test it while filling out your actual opinions. Because usually when I go through one of these surveys, I'll just kind of pick random things just to get to the point in the survey where I'm asked the question that I want to see how it works. If that makes sense, and not necessarily filling it out seriously. So we just want to know, in testing it, are you giving your actual information? And some people may not be, and some people may be.
That's
So
true. We should probably just define it as this is going to be a test. You don't. feel
Yeah,
like you
don't
have
write
to-
in your 7th-paragraph answer on, is there anything else
Right.
you want us to
So-
know? The rest of it is, I mean, 20 questions is gonna take you, especially now that we've got safety questions, in less than 10 minutes, clicking boxes and going to play with the map.
Yeah.
Or rereading it for errors or something like that.
So why don't we do that? We'll call this one a test. We're gonna say, don't put in your 7-paragraph answer, and we are gonna reset. Once we've gotten the feedback from TAC members, we're gonna reset it, and then we'll go out to the public with it.
Okay.
So that way it clarifies that, you know, we're just looking to make sure that it's working right and that there's nothing that's confusing. I'm looking for actual answers, so you don't feel like you have to fill out everything, just check through and make sure things work right, kind of thing. And that's what we're looking for.
Question behind.
yeah, but
I was thinking that if the intent, to me right now, you're basically trying to do it as a random survey to the public, but if you do it this way as a test, and you only know if it's a test, but if you really wanted to get specific input from TAC, planning boards, and college, you could actually do a different survey.
Yep.
A whole different survey, because that has a different survey, a little bit of a different focus than a general survey.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's all about the level of effort that
Right.
it takes to
Right.
field multiple surveys.
One last comment on the specific things on 18, the third, I get it, work in transportation industry, okay, work in, then other business sector. I'm assuming that means that other business sector outside of the transportation industry. And what, I'm confused, I don't know what that means and why you would, what are you gonna get out of it? Instead of other, please specify, what? Other,
Okay,
please
fair
specify,
enough.
but other specifically in a business sector outside the transportation
Yeah.
industry, is that what I'm?
yeah,
Or you
that
wanna
was
say
the
work
idea.
in
I mean,
other business sector. I mean, or do you even need that?
That's what I'm wondering.
Right.
That's basically, that's what
I
I'm
circled
questioning.
that one too, so what you say, work in other business sector.
I think originally we just said,
Just the user then.
I think we just said, we just had business. I don't remember
I
exactly
think
how
that it's
we.
just not needed. We're trying to find out if that, you know, if you say transportation user, I could be an 18-wheeler driver. Saying, you know, I use these roads all the time. This is why I'm taking the survey. I'm looking inter-regional type thing. If I work in the transportation industry, I could be a traffic engineer. I could be a design engineer. I could be, like, you could put yourself. So I just don't see, and then you're talking municipal staff because we're planning and budgeting and stuff like that, regional and state level. But I'm just trying to figure out, are you trying to say, no, I'm just a residential user? Or my business relies on the transportation network? Like, I'm just trying to figure out what's the,
I think the latter. I mean, I think my business relies on the transportation network. So thinking about somebody who has a business down at the beach and they're concerned about people, you know, they're not shipping freight, but they're concerned about people being able to get to their business and so forth. But maybe there's a way we can just make that clearer. I like the wording you used, my business relies on the transportation network.
But doesn't everybody's business?
Well,
rely-
I know, as soon as I said it, I was
I would
like,
think so, right? Well.
Well,
Maybe work in.
not if you're a state agency staff or municipal staff.
I think if the intent is to work in transportation industry, maybe, for example, put in parentheses, truck drivers, engineer, or, I mean, just give a logistics, I mean, because that's when I read that, that's what I thought you meant, but in terms of transportation system user, I'm not sure the average person would think that they should check that one, because they don't use some things
All
themselves.
right, so we've got a little.
I think some
little bit of work on the
terminology
word.
might be a little, just a little tweaks to come of it. Everybody, as you know, everybody use things
Yeah.
from where they're coming from. So I'm not sure someone off the street would go on a transportation system user.
Yeah, I
They might have
understand.
to think about that. Although we know that everybody, essentially everybody is, but I just
Right.
think maybe some different terminology.
I use the roads.
Oh, yeah, I drive.
drove.
It could
What
be-
I drive,
it could
or
be
I drive
residential.
while you
Use
buy.
the transportation.
I use the road, bike tax, and so something simpler so they can relate real quick.
When you added this because people used other and wrote in. What was the most common thing they wrote in?
I don't know, it was 10 I don't remember, it was 10 years ago, but it was,
Maybe like I drive.
yeah. something like that. So they just said, well, I'm not an elected official, I don't work for a public agency, but
Yeah,
drive.
it sounds like you're targeting this to municipal agencies and municipal workers and transportation business. Whereas my understanding was this is supposed to be a broad spectrum, general public, type of survey, everybody, which also brings me to question 21. How you, I know nothing about Seacoast Online or local papers, news or things like that, where you hope you put at least a little mini article in saying the surveys available, and especially something like Seacoast Online where they could link to the to it. So no reference to how we usually get word out to the public other than Facebook pages, which is our town doesn't have one official one. So yeah, I mean
That's actually, we get very good success from the unofficial town pages.
yes, exactly, but they're moderated by someone who may not. There's a couple in Kingston and very different amount what can go in and different views.
Yeah.
But anyways, but Carriagetown News, Seacoast Online, Seacoast Papers, whatever. Portsmouth Herald,
yep, good point.
Extra Newsletter, and other smaller towns like Tri-Town and things like that. There's a lot of people, especially because they're usually delivered free and they go to every household, and as the CPN is. A lot of people get their information.
And don't forget next door too.
Yeah, next door is another online.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll investigate all those.
So especially for the elder community, there I am, white-haired speaking for us. Not everybody uses social media, and so that is an old-fashioned but effective way of getting the word out.
Yeah, and then rather than just saying newspaper, we probably should identify.
Well, I don't
newspaper.
think the newspaper even appears in there.
Right,
Yeah.
Well, newsletter.
Town website or a town newsletter is what it is.
Yeah, you're right.
RPC
you're right.
website or RPC newsletter.
I think they put a box that say it's newspaper, could be any kind of
So,
newspaper.
Exactly,
They
that's what
combine
newspaper box. And
Town hall or public library, like municipal building or something, or municipal location.
So we've got some language tweaks to do on this, but we're fast approaching about.
Yeah, sorry.
So I know people have other things to do.
Was this my name?
Saw you backing up, and I'm like,
I'm like, I gotta go. There's another one right
That's
after.
usually when I
Okay,
start
well, this is great input.
putting them.
We will revise
You
and
stop
put
the
it up
share.
online.
Stop the share so that you can see everybody and then. Yeah, so finish what you were saying, I guess then it's good, sorry.
And we can leave this.
We'll revise, get it up online and then circulate for testing. And then in the cover memo, you see what our plans are for disseminating this, press releases to the various print newspapers that we were just talking about, MPO website, Facebook page, newsletter. We would love your help in getting this posted on municipal websites and blurbs into municipal newsletters. We can provide just a draft newsletter article, short blurb, something that can go on a Facebook posting. For our age-friendly community surveys, we did these half-page flyers that have a QR code and the web address that we can send. We can put stacks of those at town halls and town libraries so people can just take a flyer and then respond online ideally. If we could get announcements made at planning board meetings, we'll ask each of our commissioners and TAC members, if you're on your planning board, to kind of identify best ways to circulate this in your communities.
Okay. That's it on that. For project updates, the memo is, if you picked up a packet here in the room, the memo is at the back. We'll also email the project updates memo out to folks along with the links to the presentations that we did today. And all that information.
Thank you.
Any comments from anybody? No comments?
Adjourn. Motion to adjourn?
Second,
Motion to adjourn.
don't need a roll call
Do I hear a second?
Oh, yeah, we already seconded it. And you don't, you can just announce it.
You can declare.
You just declare, we don't have to vote.
Take it away.
All right, we are declaring this meeting over. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Appreciate it.
Thank you.